Hello, and welcome to this hands-on line learning session. I am Bev Ford with the Ames Center for Math and Science, and this is my friend Dorina Lazo Gilmore-Young, who is many things, including a writer and a maker in the kitchen. She has written a children's book, Cora Cooks Pancit, and it is a beautiful story of a Filipino girl who gets to cook pancit with her mom, and she gets to do her big brother and big sister's jobs. And I love how excited and enthusiastic she is to make this dish. So, Dorina, our conversations around culture and making are so much fun, but they also really challenge me as a maker cook. So thank you for coming today, and is there anything else you want to share for our audience?
Thanks, Bev. This is so fun to be able to cook together. I will just mention that I am a mama of 3 girls, and I'm married to Sean, and we love hanging out in the kitchen together. It is the place where we congregate in our home. My girls love to be creative, and I'm in a glorious season where they can actually make meals by themselves.
That's awesome. I love it when my kids actually cook for me instead of me cooking for them. So you guys can see a picture of Dorina's family, and you can see that there are lots of different ethnicities and cultures within your family.
Yeah, one of the things that we just treasure about our family is that we are multiracial. So my family, my mom's side is Italian American and a little bit of Jewish and Armenian as well. And then my dad's side is primarily Filipino, which this book is about a Filipino American family. But he's also a mix of Chinese, Polynesian, a little bit of Indian, and African as well. So we come together as a mixed family, and we love to cook ethnic dishes from all those different cultures.
Awesome. So culture and cooking is just kind of a part of what you guys do in your family.
Absolutely. I think it's just one of the ways that we express who we are.
Awesome. So today we are going to get to cook pancit with Dorina, and she is going to be our expert maker that is going to actually cook in front of us, and we're going to get to hear and smell and taste, those of us here, pancit. We have some PNGs or some pictures coming in the chat that will tell you the tools that we need for today. You're going to need a skillet, a bowl, a knife and a cutting board, a spoon, and a can opener. And then you're also going to need some different ingredients. So we're going to put that up on the screen, and Dorina and I are going to chat a little bit more. Dorina, why don't you tell us a little bit about what inspired you writing Cora Cooks Pancit, and maybe some of the stories around cooking pancit with your family?
Yeah, well, I grew up in the kitchen with my mom and my grandmas on both sides and my aunties, and so the kitchen was the place, I call it kind of the centrifugal force of our family, where everybody was like congregating and the
That's
stories
awesome.
were happening and the laughter was happening. So I grew up getting these jobs, and you'll notice this in the text of my book. I talk about the kid jobs. So I would have different jobs that I would be assigned to do, and that's really how I learned to cook this dish. But what's interesting is that a lot of my cousins that are my generation don't really know how to make pancit. And so my original idea for this came because I wanted to preserve the recipe. Because recipes, I think, are a story, they're a history of a family, and the way that we do things is actually important. And through time, recipes actually change and morph as well. So I wrote this story, even though it's a fiction story, just calling to mind some of the memories of being in the kitchen with my mom and my grandmas, and really for the future generation so that they could remember how to cook pancit and just what some of that magic felt like of being in the kitchen together.
Awesome. So today we are going to be able to connect with you guys through the chat. So if you can make sure to put it on panelists and attendees, and ask any questions, we'll see it, and then we'll respond orally to you. So the Ames Center is all about bringing about a more equitable world through math and science. And one of the ways that we want to do that is by expanding making to a broader audience. So we're all makers, but often we don't see ourselves in that light. If you want to know more about some of the other hands-on lines that we've done, go to our website at amescenter.org, and you'll find all of our resources as well as other hands-on lines that we've done. So why don't we talk about like what are some other noodle dishes if you want to throw in the chat maybe that your culture has or maybe a favorite noodle dish. So pancit is a Filipino noodle dish, and that's what we're going to cook today. And then you guys can share some other noodle dishes as well. So why don't we start by what is the first thing? Oh, one more thing I wanted to share. There was a quote that we had read at the Ames Center that really struck me and that connected with this idea of making being something that we all do, but maybe we're not just as aware of it, and the importance of using the history and the culture and those everyday experiences that are happening with children and for you as educators. Like those are the best ways for you to dive more into STEAM and making. So today, hopefully, by the end of the session, you'll have kind of thought about cooking in a slightly different light. So please make sure to throw in the chat any ideas that you have for steamy moments as well. All right, so let's get making, Dorina. What's the first thing that we need to do for pancit?
Well, the first thing, especially when I'm doing this with kids in the classroom, I try to walk them through the sequencing of this. So the first thing is that we have to gather our ingredients, and we did the work of this a little bit ahead of time, but we set up all of our ingredients, and then I'm going to turn on, we have an electric skillet up here, so we're going to be cooking with an electric skillet, and we're going to deal with the noodles first, actually.
So let me pull this up.
So we're going to show you the noodles. These are a special kind of noodle that are called rice noodles or rice stick noodles. If you see them on the camera, you can kind of tell that they're a little bit brittle, maybe a little crunchy looking, and they're made out of rice. So these are gluten-free for anybody who's interested in that. So what we did actually, and this is something that is part of the book as well, is that we soaked the noodles, or we put them in water ahead of time. And that kind of changes the consistency. Bev's going to show you. You can kind of look at how those noodles are softening up. They're curling a little bit.
Yeah, they're much more flexible. This reminds me like is really brittle and it breaks, whereas these noodles are a little more flexible.
So this is a method that I learned from my grandma of just soaking the noodles. Now, if you were making like spaghetti or a different type of pasta, you might be used to boiling the noodles. So you would like bring the water to a boil and then put it in there. But this actually starts to soften them up before we're ready to put them in the skillet.
Okay.
So this is the noodles. We'll set that aside.
Okay.
And then we're going to go ahead and get started with cooking and cutting. These are some of the ingredients that we're going to start off with.
Do we want to start with these?
Oh, sure.
So
I'll show these.
So the fun part about the noodles is they do change textures, right, as you're soaking, but you wouldn't want to eat them soaked. Well, the green onions, there's some real fun that we're going to anticipate with that as well. So tell us the story around your green onions.
Well, my grandma loved to make the food look beautiful as well as delicious, and so she always did some kind of special things that would be a garnish or something you'd put on top when you would serve it. So we're going to do this kind of ahead of time so it can be working in the background. But this is a green onion. I'm just cutting the top green part, and then what she would do, and you have to be careful with this, but she would slice it the long way, so lengthwise. You could do it maybe 3 or 4 times. You got to make sure that you have a good sharp knife for this.
So they're pretty narrow, it looks like.
Yeah, they're narrow and long, but then when you put them into a bowl with ice, so really, really cold water, we're going to start to see that those green onions change shape a little bit. And then she would use those curly onions as part of the garnish that will go on top at the end.
So that's a great example of art happening when you eat. And I know of my 3 children, I have a child that if I make it just look a little bit artsy, all of a sudden it looks so much more delicious, and she is so excited to eat this healthy food. So sometimes
true.
us mamas, we have to pull out all the stops to make the healthy food look really good. Okay, so we're gonna
sure.
let this start to do its thing.
Definitely. Okay. And then we're going to go ahead and cut some of these things that we want to get into our electric skillet or pan right away. So we have an onion that's been peeled, and I'm going to cut that. I usually cut the ends off of the onion first. And this is just a little trick also that my grandma taught me, partly because we don't want the odor of the onion to come out so quickly, and partly because we want the shape that we can cut it and be safe.
So before you start, so notice, so often in especially with younger children, we talk to them about three-dimensional shapes, and they have these like kind of just clunky rectangular solids or spheres or whatever. But the onion is a great example of a sphere, and it's rolling all over the place. And one of the like functional things as a cook that you have to think about is you don't want that onion rolling around because you're gonna possibly hurt yourself while you're trying to cut it.
Sure.
So this is where we've changed the surface into something that now has a flat edge, and now it's more stable. And there's engineering right there.
And here's a little tip too with onion. If you cut off the ends and then you rinse it, then it doesn't have as strong of an odor. So sometimes onions make us cry, which is one of the pages in my book. And if you just rinse that off real quick, then it's not
So shall we
strong.
we do that? Okay, so we're going to rinse off the onion so we don't start bawling in front of you all. but those are some of those fun tricks, because that onion juice is what is actually going into the atmosphere and causing your eyes to start to water. So you can see how you have a bunch of half circles, but depending on how you cut an onion, there's lots of different shapes that can come about. And to me, that's another really fun, playful way to connect with the geometry that's happening as we're cooking.
So true. And I mean, one of the things too, we just want to be careful, again, because this is round. So I kind of hold it, digging my nails in a little bit, or my fingers, so I can hold it in place. And I'm always cutting on the opposite side of where my fingers are. But look at how those little rainbows are being formed, like you said.
It almost looks a lot like this noodle. Like, look at the different, I wonder if part of that is, are you going to chop them smaller, or are we going to leave them this size?
I'm going to chop them smaller.
Okay.
I usually start with kind of the arc shape, and then I'll put several of them together. I'm doing this kind of in slower motion here, but we want them to be like the tiny little cubes.
You want a bite size. And that connects with another great component of mathematics, which is like a ratio of onion to other things. Like, you don't want to get too big of an onion bite.
Yes,
you really want it to kind of
true.
be bite size, which is much more similar to the ginger and the garlic that is also, that we already pre-chopped.
Yes. So that makes a big difference. We love the flavor of onions, but like you said, you don't want to have this like onion bomb in your mouth. So especially kids, I think, like to have the really smaller chopped onions, and part of the time they don't even notice that they're in there.
Yeah, definitely. So with onions, we're going to move on, and she's going to, we did actually pre-cut some of this, because the recipe that we're cooking today is going to be a quarter of the recipe, knowing that we wanted it to cook faster and to be able to finish by the end. So I chopped up some cooked chicken, and then we also have some onions there, and she can saute that when we get started. And then the other things that we wanted to show you was how ginger and garlic started. So often we see that in like a can. You just buy which is great. I am all for a little bit easier, you know, when we're cooking, and fresh garlic and fresh ginger just does taste a little bit different. So she's got a clove of garlic, and that's another great example of that three-dimensional shape that as you decompose it, that's a word we use in mathematics to like break apart. Food decomposes, and that's more of a science word, but I'm thinking more along the mathematics in education. And you can see those beautiful shapes even inside there.
Yeah, so I just cut the end off of the garlic clove, and then I'm going to show you a little trick too with your knife. You want to be careful, of course, but if you smash it down a little bit, that helps you, and it actually helps the peel to move away from the cloves. You can get it off much easier instead of like peeling that sticky skin off. And then we're gonna chop it very finely. Sometimes the word we use is mincing for this. And again, like Bev said, you can buy garlic in a jar, and it's already minced and comes like in a little bit of liquid, but we can do it real quickly here.
So we've used words like chop and minced, and that, I mean, a chef or someone that's writing a recipe will use that really to help you kind of understand the size of what that ingredient needs to be. What about our mushrooms? Oh, here was another great. So shiitake mushrooms are what is used in this recipe. Now, why shiitake mushrooms, Dorina? I know that I had to look a little bit to find shiitake mushrooms.
Well, there's actually all different types of mushrooms, and I think shiitake are very commonly used in a lot of Asian foods.
Okay.
They do have a distinct taste to them, so you could use like maybe a standard kind of white mushroom that you find in the grocery store, but it doesn't have as much flavor. So you don't want to use too many mushrooms, but you do want to use these, or I like to use these shiitake ones because they do have that distinct flavor.
And this is a dried example. So we talked about the noodles as one example of it starts dried, and one of the ways we preserve food is by taking the water out. So here is a science happening right in front of us for a purpose, right, in order to preserve our food. So these mushrooms are dried, and what we did is we added water to them. And when you add water to them, we'll put this under the camera here, it just adds that moisture and they become soft again. So one of the things that you may want to throw in the chat is like, what are the different senses that you're using as you're experiencing steam in the kitchen? So right now I can tell you as I'm feeling this, these two mushrooms, the dried one and the soaked mushroom, are very different. They feel very different. And that's a great way even for kids to be able to describe what's happening as they're cooking alongside of you.
Yeah, when I am speaking in the classroom or cooking in the class with kids, a lot of times we talk about those five senses, and the texture, the touch, is really important. So I love to like pass around these things so kids can actually touch them. And then we minced these mushrooms as well. So far in our little skillet here, we have onions and garlic.
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure that people are going to start running down the hall pretty soon because they're going to start smelling this and want to know what in the world we're doing in here.
Yes, I definitely love the smell of the onion and the ginger and the garlic. And if you notice that everything is really, really small right now. So right now she's adding a little bit of ginger. We haven't chopped that yet.
This one's garlic, but let's show the ginger.
Okay,
That's a good thing to do
there's
next.
a whole ginger. Let me get this other stuff out of the way.
So this is something fun that kids are always often surprised by, is that ginger actually is a root. And so it's this root that grows underground, but it's used a lot in Asian cuisine, especially in Filipino food. So what I'm going to do with this root, if I was going to use the fresh garlic. This is the fresh garlic. Again, you can buy it in a jar where it's already minced, but I always keep a little bit in my refrigerator in the bottom drawer that I'm going to be using for different recipes. So what I'm doing with the knife is basically peeling the ginger because I don't want that hard skin on there. And then similar to the garlic, we're going to mince it. So really
now look
tiny.
at those. Look at the shapes. So one of the things that I loved doing in a kindergarten classroom is we talked about what is that shape. So if we counted the sides on here, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Well, that has a name. That's a pentagon. So that is not a standardized pentagon. I don't know that kids would necessarily think about that. But one of the things that I think can be really meaningful for kids is they see this new shape and what would we call that? And that kind of gives that purpose to counting the sides to be able to know what to name that.
So fun.
Oh, yummy.
Okay, yes. Well, we're starting to use our sense of smell in here. We can smell that garlic and the onions mixing together with those shiitake mushrooms. And now we're about to add the ginger. Just trying to get this real small. Once again, ginger is a really strong kind of spice that you don't want to have a ginger bomb in your mouth. You want just a little bit of that flavor. And so that's why I'm taking time to really mince it and make sure that it's small. So we're going to add that to our mixture in the skillet here. And we have some that we cut before, so I'm going to add just a little bit more. I think that ginger has almost like a flowery, more fragrance to it. So I love the mixing of the smells of ginger and garlic and the onions.
Now, is that in other Filipino dishes, are those some flavors that are often used, or is that kind of more specific to pancit?
Actually, I think this is a base for most of the Filipino dishes, at least the ones that we make in our family. Like we make adobo chicken, and we also make lumpia, which is like the egg rolls. Those are also both mentioned in my book. And this is kind of a base that would be part of both of those as well.
Okay. And that can be, I mean, I've noticed that as I've cooked like different cultural foods, that there's often this like base of ingredients that they use. And then they kind of maybe adjust here and there. So
Yeah, I think that's true. Each culture kind of has their main ingredients maybe that are commonly grown, and then they use those flavors and combine them in different ways.
okay, awesome.
So we're going to go ahead and add the chicken here. Actually, if you were here up close, you could see that the onions are actually changing a little bit. They're becoming translucent, almost clear.
Okay.
And so that's how we know, okay, that fragrance is being released, the onions are getting cooked, and then I'll add the chicken in as well.
Okay, so that gets more into like art of cooking. So she talked about something visually that you're seeing happening, and maybe you're kind of getting a glimpse of it, or maybe you've just been able to see translucent onions before. There's often an aroma, but there's also that visual cue that allows you to see it. So sometimes when you're at the beginning of cooking, you kind of follow things exactly by the book, where you're following that recipe and I need to cook the onions a certain amount of time. But as you get more comfortable as a maker chef, you start to pay attention to cues and say, oh, okay, I think I'm smelling that. And then you just kind of continue to build your artistic creation.
And those are things that aren't always in the recipes. I mean, it took years of me sitting in the kitchen with my grandma or with my mom to kind of learn some of those cues. And you might not know to even ask those until you hear grandma say, oh, looks like the onions are ready. You know, they're that clear, kind of translucent. And now I'm going to actually add some soy sauce. So this is going to change the color a bit of the chicken. So it's going to have more of a caramel color from the soy sauce. The soy sauce also adds a little bit more of that salty taste too. Okay, so we've got this cooking, and now we're going to bring over some more of the vegetables.
All right, I'm going to clear off this area here so we can make room for some veggies. All right, so in our vegetable mixture, we are using the following ingredients. We have a cabbage. Maybe we'll put this over here so you can see it up close. We have a cabbage, we have carrots, we have celery, we have baby corn, and bamboo shoots. Nope, I put them in the wrong container. That's funny. So technically those are water chestnuts and those are bamboo shoots. It's not obviously a full can because I prepped them ahead of time and got mixed up. So, okay, Dorina, now these, we're not gonna all cook the same. Now note, what are some of the different shapes we're seeing here? We've got a sphere, we have somewhat of a cylinder, but we're coming to a point. You could even talk about like root vegetables.
Oh yeah.
Versus like more of, I mean, a cabbage comes at the top, so it's more like the blossom or the of it. And then we have our corn, and I don't know what a water chestnut or bamboo actually looks like. I would think bamboo is above ground.
Yeah, and then a water chestnut I think is like the chestnut cut into smaller shapes. That's a good question, actually.
Well, and that's what we could go figure out. Okay, so start with the cabbage. What are we going to do first with that?
Okay, this is, again, like the onion. We want to create a flat surface so that we can cut and be safe, because cutting this round thing is actually a little cumbersome. So I'm just cutting it in half, and then I've formed this flat surface that I can shred it. Now, you could use a shredder, you could maybe use like a food processor if you want to use fancy tools, but I tend to just like to use my nice sharp knife. And I'm shredding it, so I'm cutting really thin strips of that cabbage. The cabbage is one of those vegetables that's going to actually change shape quite a bit because it really softens down and melds together with the other ingredients. In the middle, there are some of the bigger pieces, so you might have to take those out or cut them a little bit smaller.
So you kind of want the It looks like it's a skinnier noodle. It almost looks like the noodles when you first started.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. So we're gonna put that in there.
And that's something that I'll show you guys later in the presentation. As I was getting ready and prepping ingredients, I started taking pictures of the different vegetables in different phases. And cabbage, whether you cut it with a knife versus cutting it or shredding it, I mean, it does look a little bit different. And there's a different proportion of that cabbage to the other things. But the color in there is really pretty too. And that's another way that you're looking at that artistry in the cooking.
Okay, we're gonna work on the carrot, and I'm gonna cut that end off the carrot here. Now, the carrot is something, you were talking about art, that is very important in a lot of Asian cuisine, and I remember my grandma would use the carrots to add color. So this I'm gonna actually cut in half. Again, we gotta be careful because carrots are that cylinder shape and you don't wanna be cutting on a circle.
Sure.
So again, I cut it in half, and then what we're gonna make is, my grandma used to call it matchsticks. So when you used to have matches that were like a little box, I know lots of us use the electric or the automatic lighters now, but I'm gonna cut it kind of into this flat shape, and then I think the word that we use in the recipe is julienne, which is making it like a skinny, longer piece of the carrot. So this adds a little bit of variety and diversity to both the color and the shapes that we see in the dish.
I wonder if texture-wise, it's a little bit denser of a vegetable, so it wouldn't be maybe quite as soft as some of the other ones.
Oh yeah, that's a good point too. I mean, if we just cut a carrot, and maybe this, depending on how you eat,
Yeah.
like if we just cut it like this, that would work. But first of all, I don't think it looks quite as pretty, and it also is gonna be a little bit harder. It's gonna take a longer time to cook because it is dense like that.
Right.
So these are the little matchsticks that we're gonna put in there.
And that makes me just think more around the idea of making. Often as a maker, you're forming goals. You have this idea of what you want to do. And so as her grandma and her mom have made this recipe, they've done it in such a way for a particular reason. I mean, there's a certain experience that you have when you cut the vegetables in that way.
Yeah, I would say this is definitely an aesthetic thing. So if we look at the pancit, now it has...
Do we want to add some more carrots?
Sure, we can add some more carrots that are already cut. So it has just that beautiful color in there. And we want the carrots and the cabbage to go in towards the beginning here because they are the hardest of the vegetables, so they take a little bit longer to saute. So can you hear that hiss and sizzle?
Oh, yes.
One of the things.
It looks like Priscilla mentioned making Chinese dumplings.
Ooh, fun.
That sounds delicious. And she didn't have to follow a recipe because she had made it so many times. Oh, that's so much fun. I have a recipe that my grandma would cook, which is called suibak, which is a bread that you make. And it was very fun to make it with her, but also to eat that as well. And so often we'll have those great memories with our family.
Well, and it's funny too because I think kind of the grandma generation oftentimes wouldn't necessarily use that detailed recipe. I know for my grandmas on both sides, my Filipino grandma and my Italian grandma, neither of them cooked with recipes. And so I actually had to get in the kitchen with them and like kind of write down and quantify what they were doing in order to learn and be able to share the recipe here.
And what a great memory to like continue on. And I mean, it's such an embodied experience. Often at Ames, we've talked about embodied, which is just this full body experience, whether with movement, but I would definitely say that my mouth and the taste of something really sticks with me well. And so especially as it's a pleasurable taste, I am very excited to repeat the experience and think about other things that are often happening there as well.
Well, I think this is why cooking with kids is so fun, and especially if you're trying to teach some other concepts, because they're going to remember all those flavors and smells and tastes, like you said.
And water chestnuts are another example of a pretty, I mean, they're pretty hard. I mean, they're crunchy. I've had them in salads before. And
it reminds me of the consistency of a pear, if you haven't seen it before. So I can
yeah.
kind of put my
fingernail
into it, but it has that nice kind of crunch, and it adds a different texture to the dish as well. So we got our water chestnuts in there, and let's see, what else do we have? We have bamboo shoots.
Yep, and corn, and our celery.
Yes. Oh, we've got to do the celery.
Yeah,
Celery is one of those ones that needs to break down a little bit more too. The water chestnuts and the bamboo shoots are
I have some pre-cut. Do we want to throw the celery in now?
Sure.
And then you can just show them how you cut them?
Yeah. So with the celery, I usually cut it this way, like the width way, and then in half again. Celery has not as bright of a flavor as some of these other ingredients, so it's gonna kind of mix in there with the other things. But I'm gonna call this a chop. This is a chopped consistency as far as like how big it is.
Okay.
And you can add the rest of those in there too.
Those.
Now I'm actually gonna reserve the corn until the very end, because baby corn is actually really soft already, and then it can get kind of mushy if you put it in too early.
Celery is another great example of just the different shapes that kids are experiencing in the kitchen. So I know when I was a kid, my grandma would have celery and they'd put peanut butter in the center of it, because it was like a boat that held the peanut butter a little bit more easily.
That's so fun.
But it's really like a half a cylinder that's been cut out. The center of it has been cut out.
So I'm just going to cut these bamboo shoots a little bit and put that in there. Now, one of the things I am paying attention to is the sound. I don't know if you can hear that well on the camera, but our sizzle kind of went down a little bit. And so I'm going to add a little bit more soy sauce at that point, just to make it have a little bit more of that flavor.
So the sizzling is going down, which means you're not hearing like a liquid cook. So, I mean, think about boiling water as it cooks, like there's something to be heard. So that was that cue that Dorina was using to help her to know like what to add to the dish.
And one of the things we want to pay attention to too is you don't want those ingredients to stick to the bottom of the pan. So that helps you kind of know, well, I don't hear that sizzle anymore, I better add a little bit more liquid. I also have this cup of water here, so if I can always add a little bit of water, or even chicken broth or vegetable broth if you want to add a little more flavor to it as well. Okay, this is looking good.
Okay. So the only thing left we have to add is the baby corn, and you said you wanted to wait a little bit on that. Do we want to do that before or after the noodles?
We're going to do that after the noodles, actually.
Okay.
Kind of more like for the garnish. So it's probably a good time for us to do the noodles now. And let
me get this out of the way.
Yeah, let's take our bowl. So this is the bowl of noodles that we're soaking. You can see that they're even more flexible now than they were before. And I'm going to actually just take them and put them straight into the skillet. So I'm not going to do the step of boiling the noodles because they're actually going to be kind of steamed in the electric skillet. I might have to just add a little bit of water.
So we've used water to change the ingredients at a molecular level. We have also used heat or temperature as a way to change it, because we stuck our green onions in cold water, but we're using heat right now in our pan to change the texture of the noodles so that it is what you're wanting to experience, that soft, yummy, noodly dish in your mouth.
So I'm actually going to add just a little bit of water because I can see that these need to break down even a little bit more, like you're talking about. The water or chicken broth, if you choose to use chicken broth, can help. And the vegetables are kind of underneath, and I let the noodles sit on the top for a little while until they get a little bit softer.
Okay, so that allows the vegetables to kind of cook more because they're directly connected to that heat, and then the noodles are just getting more like steamed. It makes me think of I use an Instant Pot, and it'll often tell me to put, I can't even remember what it's called, but it keeps it off of the bottom of which is part of that steam and that temperature that is happening for whether it's meat or whatever ingredient is in there.
Sounds good. Well, I'm going to add a little bit of salt and pepper too.
Okay. And then while we're letting those cook a little bit, Dorina's going to read some, she's not going to read the whole book, but she's going to read some of the book that are just some pages that highlight some of the things that we've been talking about about steam today in our cooking.
Yeah, so one of the fun things about the book is it actually follows the recipe, and she is in the kitchen with her mama, and then she's also learning about her cultural heritage. So I'm going to share just a couple of pages here of the book, and it gives you a taste for what the text sounds like. It says, "Did Lolo teach you how to cook?" Cora wanted to know. "He did," said Mama. "I followed him each day to the big kitchen. He created all kinds of dishes to fill the hungry workers' tummies. And while he cooked, he told stories about the Philippines where he was born." Cora nodded as she listened. "Lolo told us about the countryside where he grew up. His family harvested pineapples, bananas, and papayas. He used to eat smashed fried bananas and sweet rice wrapped in banana leaves." Cora stuffed her hands in the deep apron pockets. She imagined Mama and Lolo cooking together. She saw Lolo as a boy unwrapping the banana leaves and scooping the sweet rice from inside.
Awesome. And that's just a great example of Cora experiencing culture and cooking. It was a privilege for her to be able to do her brother and sister's job. And so as she is talking to Mom and thinking about those great memories about her mom learning how to cook from her dad, and then Cora's learning how to cook from her mom as well. So there's some fun pages in the book that also talk about the noodles. So I wanted to have Dorina read these as well.
Yeah, so Cora is learning about the noodles and like what you talked about a little bit earlier with soaking them in the water and changing the shape of them. So it says, "Let's get started," Mama told Cora. "Open the package of rice noodles and put them in this bowl of water. Do you know why we soak them?" "So they get soft," answered Cora. "You've been paying attention," said Mama. And then she plopped a big clump of noodles into the bowl. So that's the process that we did at the beginning. And now the noodles are in our pancit pan or our electric skillet, and they are actually getting steam. So now I see that they are starting to change. They're getting a little bit softer there. I'm going to add a little bit more water to the situation just to speed up that process.
All right. So the next page in the book talks about Cora trying to figure out how to know whether or not the noodles are ready. So I'll go ahead and read this page while Dorina's stirring the pancit. "Can you check the noodles, Cora?" asked Mama. Cora scratched her head. She tried to remember what her sister Sarah did when she checked the noodles. Cora thought she should sniff the noodles, but she picked up the bowl too quickly. Water sloshed onto the floor. "Are you making a mess?" asked Mama with pointy eyebrows. "Silly Cora, you just need to touch the noodles with 2 fingers to see if they are soft." Mama laughed and handed Cora a towel to mop up the mess. Mama went to work straining the noodles. And I love that because I have made a mess as I have used rice noodles before, because that water, and I don't know that I've ever strained them as much as I kind of take a clump out and dump them in using some of the moisture from it. But I love how Cora is learning what to pay attention to.
Yes.
And there's science happening at a molecular level as those noodles are actually getting water added back into them. And then eventually we're adding water and steam to finish cooking them.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, these ones are getting ready. We want to be careful that we don't stir too much because actually the noodles can get too mushy that way. So I just kind of let them sit on top and make sure they're getting enough of that steam or that water.
And not sticking to the bottom.
Yes.
Because the bottom, when they start to stick, then that becomes a noodly mess, which I can attest to. I have done. They still taste okay, but they are a bit of a noodly mess, and it is much preferred to have them on top of the vegetables so that they don't get all mushy. So one of the other pages that I wanted to have Dorina read just describes pancit in such a playful way. Dorina, the thing that I love about your book is the vocabulary that you use to describe food is so much fun. And I think such a great way for even kids to think about describing what they're eating. Normally, we don't really exactly talk about that, but your book is such a great example of being able to do that. So we'll have Dorina read this next page.
Okay, this is one of my favorite spreads, actually. It says, Cora was surprised Mama was letting her decide. She scrunched up her pug nose and began to think. All her favorite Filipino foods danced in her head. Lines of lumpia pranced in rows. Adobo chicken legs bebopped in time. There was a large bowl of pancit. The thick noodles and vegetables curled and swirled in a dance party. So I talk to kids a lot about how cooking, there's music in the cooking. There's the hiss and the sizzle that we hear in the electric skillet, and this page especially kind of invites them into this like dance party of ingredients. So.
Yes, I love that. And what you put in your mouth, I do think can be a dance party, and that you know, dances vary. I am a part of a family of 5. My husband and I have 3 children, and we all dance a little differently. So I would say, you know, we all have our styles, just like there's certain foods that we may like more or less, but realizing that delight that happens. And to me, that's one of the powerful things. When you connect culture and food, you're sharing a little piece of your identity and something that is just full of amazing memories, because I can just imagine all those memories of you cooking with your aunties and your grandma, and maybe you're so young you don't even get the big girl jobs yet, but you're sitting there and you're smelling it and you're just anticipating what that delicious food is going to taste like. So foods vary in flavors. So allowing kids to share that is a great way for them to connect their identity, but also to learn that, you know, we're all kind of different. And sometimes the flavors are a little bit different and we haven't tasted it before. So how do we respect each other and try things and learn that, you know, my world is not the only world.
Yeah, that's something that I think is really important for us to model as teachers and as parents with kids, and when they are involved in the cooking process, they are automatically like so much more invested when they're eating it. There is kind of a reverence and a respect that I've seen when we've shared it in the classroom, especially for kids who maybe have never tasted pancit before.
Awesome. So it's still cooking, yes? Or are we done?
You know what? We are just about there. I think it needs just a couple more minutes, but it's looking really good. I can see that the noodles have this beautiful caramel color to them. All the vegetables look like they are soft but not mushy. I don't want mushy. And then in just a minute or so, I think we could go ahead and add the baby corn if you want to.
Oh, okay, great.
Bring that in.
Yep. Let's grab that.
So the baby corn is something that kids love just because they're these miniature kind of corns, and they have a little bit of a sweet taste to them. And they add the color yellow in there. So we just did kind of smaller bite-sized pieces, and then we're going to add that on top.
Lots of colors in there, orange and green and yellow. The noodles are kind of brownish.
Yeah, and then we've got the chicken in there. Different families make them with different, you know, meats. I know sometimes my grandma would do shrimp or pork. Okay. Or you could also do a vegetarian version of this as well and have it more as a side dish.
Okay, well, why don't we let that finish cooking a little bit more, and I am going to show some pictures of just the different phases and the different ways that we can chop some of these yummy ingredients. So the rice noodles was one of those examples where you can see on the white plate, they're nice and they break easily, they're brittle because they're dried. And then slowly as they get cooked, you can see how they do the, as Dorina described them, somersaulting and dancing around. They're just missing their vegetable partners. And then the onion I thought was really fascinating too. You see all those different circles, and as Dorina had mentioned, making a flat surface so that it's more stable for chopping, and then all the way down to mincing. The third picture in this one was something I had learned on a cooking show where they talked about, I think of it as almost like an array that I'm making on top of the onion, and that allows me to just slice it and be able to easily have those diced pieces. And then we have our ginger, where you see like a slice of the ginger, and depending on what angle you're cutting at will really kind of depend on what that area or perimeter might be. So being able to think about that and what's the size and the amount of ginger that you want. And then we have our cabbage. So Dorina talked about one of her favorite tools is just a sharp knife. And so she's able to, and my cabbage slices here are not as small as she just did today. So I will vouch that my knife is probably not as sharp and I am not as good with it. So they're a little bit thicker. And then the farthest is when I actually used a shredder, but then that's just one more dish. So if you can slice it really small, then you only have a knife to have to clean at the end. And then this is just bamboo, another example of just the different rectangles that are happening. So this is one of the other pages that I wanted to share with you guys today. So Cora finally gets to stir the pancit, which she feels so proud to do because she's now able to do that big girl job. So do you want to read this for us, Dorina?
Sure. Now for the fun part, said Mama. Let's add the noodles to the pancit pan. Can I stir? Asked Cora. She knew this was another grown-up job. Yes, but be careful near the burner, called Mama, who pulled out a stool for Cora to stand on. Cora began to stir in a wide circle. She watched the noodles somersault over the carrots and celery. She made the soft onions sway this way and that, this way and that. The smell of ginger mixing with garlic floated to her nose.
All right. So if you want the book, we will be sending a link that you can buy the book. And we're going to now finish up the pancit. So there are some garnishes that you put on at the end. And if you want to pay attention to, we'll get a little close-up of these beautiful little curly green onions. Who would know that in cold water, a green onion would tighten up so small?
Yes, it makes them just kind of fun and curly. And this is something that my grandma would do to put on top of the pancit. I'm actually going to put some pancit on this plate for us.
Okay,
so we can
perfect.
see it. And then we're going to also add some eggs. And then I think we've got some chopsticks.
We do. I'm going to grab them right now.
Too. This looks really good. I wish you all could taste it for those who are watching, but you'll just have to try making it yourself perhaps. Or go support your local Filipino restaurant. Okay, so we've got a little bit of pancit here. I'm going to add those curly green onions on top just to make it pretty.
Let me get it out of the way so you can get it. There we go.
Show you up there. Oh, we got our egg. The egg is another thing that my grandma would use as a garnish. So we have these that are sliced, and sometimes she would just kind of arrange them across the top, make it look pretty.
Eggs are another very fascinating three-dimensional shape because you have the yolk, which is this sphere inside the white part of the egg. And asking kids, you know, what shape do you think you're going to see when you cut it open is just a fun, playful space to be able to predict or form hypotheses.
I love how your mind works, friend. Do you want to show them? Do you want to cut it?
Yep,
You could maybe cut it the lengthwise.
All right, so the other eggs I had cut this way. This time I cut long ways, and maybe even popping that out and realizing, because it's possible that kids don't even realize the shape of that egg yolk, you know, right in the middle there. And how much, I mean, I know my mom always told me I wasn't supposed to play with food when I was a kid, but it's just a more fully embodied experience when you touch and taste and you experience those shapes. I guarantee I would have remembered geometry a lot better if it was connected to food.
Absolutely. I have to say, my mom actually told us to play with our food.
Well,
She
that
was a
sounds
teacher.
very fun.
So she would let us play and draw pictures in the flour and, you know, create recipes. And I think just encouraging that in kids is another way that we encourage kids to be makers, like you were talking about earlier.
And it allows you to just be able to experience that food and participate in some ways. So finding those creative ways for kids to come alongside and be able to come and make with you is awesome.
I love it.
All right. So
I
we're
think
going to taste some of
We
this?
have to try it.
Okay,
Like, we have
of
to
course.
be like all the cooking shows where we eat in front of people,
Okay.
right?
But I'm not, and I don't use chopsticks very well.
Oh, I put
so
you on the spot there. That's
That's
okay.
all right. That's all right.
I know. The problem with these noodles is they all sometimes
So
clump together.
here is the engineering happening, front and center. So I used my egg to be able to, you know, be a stable force to hopefully get in my mouth.
Good job. We're making a big mess with them, but that's what's
Very
fun about
good.
noodles.
Very flavorful. Wow, that is delicious, Dorina. I'm
Yeah,
just
this
gonna
could-
savor that taste in my mouth.
Can you taste some of the nuances of those ingredients? Like what kind of pops out at you when you're tasting it?
Well, given I was struggling with the chopsticks, the egg yolk was the most dominant flavor.
Okay.
I would have, if I was eating it at home, I would have chopped up my egg a little bit
Here.
more. But
We need to give you a spoon or a fork, probably.
but I really like the carrots with the celery.
She's making the music with her mouth. I love it.
And the soy sauce as well. Like that, that's really the salty part of the recipe. I mean, salt is such an important part of cooking, but with this recipe, it seems more dominantly coming from the soy sauce as opposed to like, you didn't look like you shook a lot of salt
I
on
just
that.
put a little bit of salt. You can put salt and pepper in it if you want, but I do allow the soy sauce really to be that main flavor. Yeah.
Awesome. So one of the things that we want to kind of do, as we've done with many of our hands online, is think back to like, what were those steamy moments? And then we also look at the principles of early steam. And today, the thing that we really wanted to highlight was that steam is not culturally neutral. Steam is happening in our cultures, and we want to highlight that and use that really just as an open space to develop community in our classrooms or in the places that we are and learn more about the people that are in our communities. So also just that children have a variety of ways to communicate understanding, and what I love about Dorina's book is the playful way that she used words in order to describe the food and the encouragement that we can have with kids as they're eating something, you know, using that playful language to describe what's happening inside of their mouth. So, Dorina, why don't you, how can people connect more with you?
Well, there's a lot of ways. You can check out my website at dorinagilmore.com. I have all my books there. I have a couple of new children's books that are coming out soon. And our family also recently started a membership program that's called Global Glory Chasers. This is something that actually just kind of came out of a pain point during the pandemic. We had planned on doing a lot of traveling this last year and had to cancel most of our trips, and we got this idea of what if we took people on trips with us from the comfort of their home. So basically what we do is we've curated these resources that are great for parents and teachers. Each month we focus on a different country and a different culture, and we cook together. We generally share 3 recipes, and then we have a video that kind of walks you through how to make those recipes, and a whole list of books, movies, and other resources that people can use so they can learn about those cultures.
Yes, and I will attest to, I have signed up for that, and I've looked at some of those different cultures and cooked some of the food. And the thing that makes it really nice is I know often trying to go into looking through the internet to find good resources can be very exhausting. And this is simple, and the recipes are really pretty easy to make. And again, part of making is making mistakes, so you don't have to pressure yourself with doing it perfectly. That is how I think we really can model for kids, you know, to learn by doing and to have that growth mindset that we often talk with them about. So that's a great way for you to just connect with different cultures But also just look at the resources in your room. I mean, you may have a mom that wants to come and cook, just like Dorina has cooked with her daughter's classroom as well. So someone asked about the best brand for rice stick noodles. Do you have a favorite, Dorina?
You know what? There's all different ones. We can even maybe share a link later, but I usually order them on Amazon or go to my local Asian market. We live here in Central California, so we actually have a good number of Asian markets, but even some of the mainstream grocery stores have a little Asian section. And I'll look for, it either needs to say rice noodles or rice stick noodles, or these specifically say pancit noodles on them. I will mention there's a different type of pancit noodle that's made of wheat, and I always get rice noodles. That's actually a different style of dish called pancit canton, but this one is the one that we modeled for today.
Okay, and I looked, there are some that actually look like stick, and those were ones that I had also bought, and I was, texting with Dorina, which ones are we supposed to have? But these are actually really thin, and they loop.
Yeah, they're kind of like curly hair.
Yes, which is why in the book they talk about somersaulting, because, really, and that's part of that eating experience. Those noodles are all like intertwined and having a dance party. So you mentioned the resources of Global Glory Chasers and your books, but you also have a podcast where you share about food as well and running. I know you're more than just a chef, but today we're highlighting that part of your making. So thank you guys for joining us. Is there anything else you would like to add?
I just want to encourage you to explore. And I think you kind of said this, Bev, but I think sometimes we get intimidated to try recipes if they're from a different culture and we're not familiar with them. But I have discovered in almost 10 years of traveling and speaking in the classrooms with kids that there is something so affirming for kids from different cultures when they get to explore these different types of recipes and books and history. So, for example, when I've gone into schools where I'm doing an assembly or I'm cooking, and there are kids who are from Filipino background, it is so exciting for them that we're learning from pancit, which is something that they have made, historically in their family. Or introducing this dish to kids who have never had it before, but as we're making the recipe together and they're invested in the process, almost unanimously, I have kids who say, oh, this is really good. Like, they're surprised that it's something that they might not have tried on their own, but because they were part of the steam process, they were part of the making process, that they just dive in, and then they're asking me for seconds.
That's awesome. That is awesome. And so really there's that ownership that is happening as kids are making, and they're a part of that process. And that's, I think, a really exciting piece, and what can be a really positive thing with combining cooking and STEAM. So traditionally, I don't know how much cooking has been thought of in the STEAMy world, but not only do we use STEAM with cooking, but there are lots of moments where science is happening. We saw chemistry happening. You're watching ingredients change forms. Things are happening at a molecular level that I probably couldn't even articulate very well. But to me, just inspiring kids and getting them excited about what is happening in front of them is what can be so powerful. And recognizing that it's an art. Like Dorina, the way she cooked this, I learned something new even today about how she cooked it that maybe didn't get written in the recipe exactly. And that, I think, is one of the powerful things. We want to honor a recipe and the culture, but we also just need to recognize that that's part of making, is we're going to learn and grow and be able to kind of come with new things as we discover yummy flavors that go together. So hopefully you guys we're going to put in the chat, there's a chat around where to get Dorina's book, but also her website has and I think we're almost out of time. So I will just stop talking. Thank you for coming and hanging out with us today. Our next Hands-On Line is going to be pop-up cards, and we would love for you to join us next month with our Hands-On Line. So bye.
Thank you. Salamat.